Hello friends, once again it's story time. Now, I hope you enjoyed my hillbilly and mountain story that I put up. Today I'm going back to the Bible, my favorite story collection. I'm going to pull a story out that is very dear to me, but I want to remind you first, I'm not a preacher, I'm not a theologian, I'm just a storyteller. I'm not here to read, quote, or try to translate the Bible. I'm just trying to accurately tell a story from it in my own words. I want to share the joy of these stories with you. Today, I'm telling a story that is considered one of the greatest love stories in the Bible, which the Bible is, if you think about it, just one great big love story from God about his love for us. This particular story I'm telling today, though, is one of my personal favorites, because not only is it a great story, but the woman in it is the namesake of my own dear mother. I present to you today the story of Ruth. It was near the end of the time of Judges in the land of Judah. We join this story at a time when Judah was experiencing a drought. Now, everywhere you look, crops, trees, rivers, streams were all just drying up completely. I mean, a bad, bad drought. Famine had completely enveloped the land. Excuse me. Near Bethlehem, a family was sitting in the kitchen talking about the seriousness of this situation. A man named Elimelech was sadly telling his wife Naomi, we have no other options. If it doesn't rain soon, we're going to be forced to leave our lands. And I know everything we have is right here, and I don't want to travel to a foreign land. But it seems to me our only choice is to go to Moab and hope to find food and a place to stay until conditions here get better. Naomi replied, I don't like the idea of going to a foreign land either, Elimelech, but this is what we need to do. Elimelech looked at her and said, it'll be okay. We can take our sons, Mahlon and Chilion, with us, and we will remain a God-fearing family even in the land of pagans. Even if we live in Moab, we can still be sure our sons grow up proper and are taught our beliefs in God. After all, they're both good boys, and they do whatever we ask them to do. Naomi was quick to agree to the good boys part. Yeah, they're good boys, but the one thing she was afraid of was they may want to eventually marry a Moabite girl. That risk wouldn't be as great if we stayed here in Judah. But we must have food to survive, so we don't have much choice. So soon after that day, Elimelech, Naomi took their sons and their meager possessions, and they moved to a new country, the country of Moab. Soon after they arrived in Moab, tragedy struck, and Elimelech died. Naomi was left in a foreign land with her two sons alone. Later, just as Naomi had feared, both sons married Moabite women. Chilion married a woman named Orpah, and Mahlon married a woman named Ruth. Now, we'll pause the story for a fun side note. In January 1954, a girl was born in Mississippi, and her parents named her Orpah, after the core character from this story. Well, being in Mississippi, seems everyone in the family mispronounced her name so often that instead of Orpah, she became known as Oprah. Yeah, that Oprah. Oprah Winfrey has nothing to do with it, just now you know the rest of the story. Back to our story, though. About 10 years later, tragedy again struck the family, as both Mahlon and Chilion died. Now, Naomi was without her husband or her sons, and she was feeling so hurt and lonely for her family. One evening she told her daughter-in-laws, I feel so alone. Here I am, alone in a foreign country. My husband is dead. My sons are dead. There are no members of my family here, except for you two. Except for you, I have no family anywhere near here. Well, you certainly have Orpah and me, Ruth answered. Naomi said, yes, I know that, Ruth, but here's my dilemma. Our law says you and Orpah can marry your husband's brothers. The only problem is there are no brothers left, and I'm too old to bear another son. Even if I could, you wouldn't want to wait till he could grow up into a man just to marry him. It doesn't add up. I've thought about that too, added Orpah. It's up to the two of you what you do, said Naomi. I've decided I'm going to return to Judah and pick up my life among my own people, or at least the people who used to be my own people. You two are not obligated in any way to go with me. You are free to return to your parents' home with my blessing. I wish many good things for you here in your own homeland of Moab. No hard feelings. I love you both. Well, Orpah gave it some thought and said, I think I will stay here in the land of Moab. An understandable response. Ruth, on the other hand, responded with one of the most eloquent and well-known professions of love in the entire Bible. She said, Naomi, you've been so good to me. Don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go. And where you live, I will live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I will die. And that's where I will be buried. So help me God. Not even death itself is going to come between us. Well, that didn't leave much room for discussion there. So Naomi and Ruth both kissed Orpah goodbye and started out on their journey back to the land of Judah. Arriving back in Bethlehem, former friends and neighbors welcomed them warmly. Welcome back. It's so good to have you back, Naomi, they all felt. But Naomi wasn't as thrilled at that time to be back because she was still hurting from her losses. I feel it's important to pause here and note how important the names of the people in this book of Ruth are. Elimelech, her deceased husband's name, translates to my God is King. So his faith was primary above all in his family. Their son Mahlon's name means sickness. And his brother Killian's translates to wasting. Now they're both deceased. Naomi's name translates to pleasing. But now she's taken to calling herself Mara, which means bitter. Now, after losing her husband and two sons in a foreign land, who could really blame her for feeling bitter? But even as bitter as she felt, she still recognized the one thing she could not be bitter about. And she proclaimed it to all her friends when introducing Ruth. Please, welcome my daughter-in-law Ruth. She has left her home country of Moab behind and chosen to stay with me. Such a dear friend and helpful companion. I couldn't ask for more. But her friends, they opened their hearts. We're glad to welcome you here, Ruth. Let us help you both get settled into your new house. So she and Ruth settled into the small house on the land her husband Elimelech had owned. Now, in Judah and Bethlehem, the drought had ended, and the barley harvest was well underway in the fields nearby. Men of the village were busy from early morning to late at night getting this annual work completed while the weather was still good. As the men worked, some of the women were also busy, gathering stalks of grain that were missed or left behind on the ground. This process was called gleaning. Gleaning was ordered by Levitical law to provide for widows, orphans, strangers, and the poor. Most farmers of that day gladly allowed this process, but some just tolerated it. And the women were often harassed or mistreated by the workers. sometimes this gleaning amounted to a sizable harvest of grain. For some, it was the only food source they had, so it was worth putting up with a lot of the harassment these women had to face. When Naomi suggested to Ruth, go down the road to the barley field at daylight tomorrow and work along with the other women, I'm sure they're going to welcome you. Next morning, Ruth got out there before daylight, and the other workers did welcome her indeed. She eagerly began gathering the heads of the grain, just like the other workers were doing. Later in the afternoon, the landowner, a man named Boaz, came by to see how the work was proceeding and pointed over her and asked his foreman, who's the new girl over there? Well, foreman looked back and he told him, she's the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters, and I'm telling you, she has been hard at work nonstop. She didn't stop to eat when the rest of them did. She took a few minutes of rest over in the shade, and that was it. Moved by her hard work, Boaz went over to Ruth and introduced himself. He told her, you are welcome to gather grain right here in my fields. Stay with these women working here and don't go anywhere else. I've told my men not to bother you. Make yourself at home. In fact, he even had someone bring some leftover food from lunch over to her. Said, you've got to eat. Ruth looked at him and said, why, sir, are you being so kind to me? I am only a foreigner. I know that, replied Boaz, but I also know about the love and kindness you have shown your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Ruth simply replied, I hope I may continue to please you, sir. Returning home from work that evening, after a long day in the barley field, Ruth was tired, but she was happy. She had managed to gather a full bushel of barley. That's a huge amount. She gave this barley to Naomi and shared the food that Boaz had brought her. Naomi looked at all this bounty and asked Ruth, how did you gather this kind of favor? Naomi said, Ruth, I met the farmer. His name's Boaz, and he's a nice guy. He was very nice to me. In fact, he told me to continue to work in his fields until the harvest was completed. Well, Naomi was delighted. I'm glad to know that, Ruth. Boaz is a relative of your husband, Mahlon. Now, oh, Naomi, she started thinking, according to the customs here in Judah, by being a blood relative, Boaz would be eligible to marry Ruth and serve as her redeemer. Naomi decided to wait and see how it all played out. But for right now, she told Ruth, I'm really glad that Boaz seems to like you and is willing to look out for you. That means a lot to me. Well, after several more days, the barley harvest was complete. Ruth worked every day with the other women and was able to glean a lot of barley. Boaz was in the field for at least part of most days as the work continued. He made a special effort each day to spend a little bit of time over there with Ruth. They became close. He even instructed his men to start leaving behind a few extra stalks when they were harvesting the barley. Well, the barley harvest was over, and the wheat harvest had begun. And it was a similar process. The men cut the wheat, formed it into bundles or sheaves, and the women came along behind them and picked up the stalks that had been missed, and they would later thresh these heads out and get the grain out of those wheat heads. And soon, the wheat harvest was also near completion. And Naomi decided it's time to make her move and help Ruth find a home and a man who would take care of her. So she told Ruth to wash and perfume herself, put on her finest clothes. She explained Boaz would be at the threshing floor that night as they winnowed the harvest, or when they separate the wheat from the chaff. As her mother-in-law advised, Ruth waited until the work was over and the men had started to go to sleep. She noted where Boaz had chosen to sleep, and she quietly walked over when he was asleep, and she lay down at his feet. Middle of the night, Boaz woke up and found Ruth sleeping there at his feet. He shook her awake and said, "What do you want?" She said, "Please don't send me away." She asked him to take her as his wife and give her dead husband's inheritance to their first son, so her husband's lineage would not die out. This was the process known as redeeming a widow in Israel. He responded that he would be willing to do so, but he knew there was another relative who was closer kin to Mahlon than he was. He'd have to agree to this because he had first rights. Well, he led Ruth away from the threshing room quietly before the sun had risen so no one else would know she'd been there. Now, when Ruth returned home to Naomi, she told her what had happened. Naomi was pleased. She told Ruth, "We'll wait a few days to see what Boaz can do to settle this." Well, it didn't take a few days. When Boaz awoke the next morning, he went and sat at the gate of Bethlehem until he spotted the man who was closer relation to Naomi than himself. He called the man over to speak, and he gathered 10 of the elders to witness their discussion. Ooh, we just have a talk now. He told him, "The widow of Elimelech has returned from Moab and wants to sell her land." As the closest relative to her, it was the man's right to buy it if he was interested. Well, the man was interested, all right. He wanted that land. But then it was explained to him that in buying that land, it also meant he'd have to marry and redeem the Moabite widow. I'm out. He reconsidered and declined and agreed that Boaz could buy the land and redeem Ruth. It was agreed upon and witnessed by the elders that Boaz would redeem Ruth, bring her mother-in-law Naomi into his house, and buy the property of Elimelech so his bloodline would not die in Israel. So Boaz and Ruth were married. About harvest time the following year, Ruth gave birth to a son, keeping Elimelech's bloodline alive. Naomi was now a proud grandmother, and she was overjoyed. She helped take care of this newborn baby as if it were her own child. Now, the reason this story is so important, besides the fact that it's a beautiful lesson in love and the mending of broken families, the important factor is the maintaining of that bloodline I kept mentioning. You see, Boaz was a direct descendant of Abraham, and he and Ruth named their baby Obed. Obed grew up to become the father of Jesse, who in turn was the father of David. Making sense now, huh? A direct ancestor of our Savior Jesus. God has shown his love for all mankind by taking this pagan Moabite woman and inserting her into the earthly lineage of his very own son. This act showed that God was still a God of all people. God loves us all. Now, to sum it up, these 3 lessons are ours from Ruth. 1, God loves all people, regardless of what they are, who they are, or where they come from, period. Number 2, there is hope, even during the most devastating of times. Naomi and Ruth were destitute, broken, and busted, but both of them knew that somehow, through faith in the Lord, life was going to work out for them. And in the end, it did. In the moments where life feels like it's crushing you, start with a little faith. Number 3, God uses unlikely people for his purpose. Anyone looking at Ruth, this foreign widow, would have never guessed that God would choose her bloodline for the line of the promised Redeemer, Jesus. Ruth's story reminds us that even in our obscurity and the mess of what may be our daily lives, God finds a way to use the most unlikely people in ways we can never imagine. He loves us all. He loves us all. That completes my telling of the story of Ruth. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I love you. I hope to see you soon. Sorry about the voice. Try to love one another. It's so easy, even when it's not. Thank you.